For those of you who don't know, my name is Gillian Tett. I'm both a columnist at the Financial Times. I'm also at Cambridge University these days. And I'm going to be co-moderating a session with Carl Bildt, who needs no introduction because he's been involved with YES for a very long time. And of course was previously Foreign Minister and Prime Minister of Sweden. And we've just had a session with Minister Shmyhal talking about the military situation with a bird's eye view. We're now going to have a more on-the-ground, worm's eye view about what's actually happening in terms of the military situation, what the military people on the ground think they need or don't need, whether they're optimistic or pessimistic, and what they're most worried about, what they're most hopeful about, and above all else, what they need and what they can give to the outside world. So we have several people taking part in this session. Andrii Biletsky, who's the commander of the 3rd Corps of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, who'll be joining us online. Ihor Obolenskyi, who is the commander of the 2nd Khartia Corps of the National Guard. He'll also be talking to us online. We've got General Andrii Hnatov, who is the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and General Ievgen Moisiuk, who's the Deputy Minister of Defense, and David Petraeus, who is well known to all of us here as well. So I'm going to start with the first question, hopefully with Andrii Biletsky online. So perhaps I can start by saying a very big thank you to Commander Biletsky for being here this morning. I won't ask where you're talking from because I know that you are somewhere on active duty right now. But can you give us a sense of what the situation is at the moment on the front line, and how does it compare to 2022?
Well, it's an open secret that the situation on the line of contact is very complicated. Ukrainians are impacted by a massive lack of resources. And munitions are also in short supply. However, this situation isn't new to us. On the other hand, we experienced something like that in early 22. The difference you ask about 2022 and 2025, well, we are kind of in no man's land in terms of the manuals, tactical guides, military equipment that had been designed to fight wars of the past, of the previous generation, are in the process of revision. In 2022, the war was more or less of classical nature. Some means such as UAVs were used, but were not at that time felt to be key to success. In 2025, the situation has changed dramatically. The LOC is very thin, so to speak, because of the logistical problems to deliver infantry units to the LOC to continue building fortifications is oftentimes very challenging, if at all possible. Adversary drones and ours can now monitor the situation to the depth of 20-25 kilometers on both sides. Our cannons have been transported to earlier safer positions, but are still very much exposed to the enemy drones. And this makes the situation very different. We do not operate the notion of the rear positions, and these challenges are pretty new to us, so we have to be looking for a new strategy or operational tricks to deal with these challenges. Those who will be first will succeed. Well, technically, it seems clear. In addition to promoting the evolution of aerial unmanned vehicles, I'd say that we are on the threshold of a revolution in the ground. Unmanned vehicles that seem to be able to replace a significant number of personnel, both in logistical matters and in warfare and engagement. Russians, if you want to know my opinion, have advanced here more than us. They developed the strategy of infiltration, employing a small number of infantrymen. They also developed successful procedures of interaction with the drones, and this is indeed something that brings them advantage on the battlefield. Now we have to respond to it.
Thank you. Can I ask a very quick follow-up question, very quickly? Is the biggest problem a lack of money or innovation or soldiers, human soldiers? What is the biggest problem right now? And then I'll ask my co-moderator, Carl Bildt.
Я би сказав, що все-таки найбільший брак – це завжди брак стратегії.
Well, strategy, if you know what I mean, lack of appropriate strategy. Ukraine was ahead of Russia in terms of innovation. Back in 2022 through 2024, Ukraine was the first to create the system of total observation using their drones. Ukraine was also the first to develop a heavy drone bomber. We were the first to complete the so-called FPV drone revolution. Ukraine was the first to create a system of intercepting drones, coupling it with a system of radars and so on. And everything I mentioned was created from bottom up. We took pride in that, however, did very little to scale these achievements up. And Russians, who were, so to speak, diligent pupils of ours, always following in our steps in terms of many things, are now ahead of Ukraine in terms of FPV drones. Well, FPV drones are not that expensive, so I think that we will prevail here one day. But where strategy was missing is what made us feel here. So it is important. So, well, funding will always be in Ukraine, elsewhere, and of course we need more funds, but more than anything we need a very clear strategy as to how we are going to use the resources made available to us.
Thank you very much indeed, Commander Biletsky. Over to you, Carl.
Thanks very much. That was one voice from the Frontline. The second voice from the Frontline is Ihor Obolenskyi, who is commander of the 2nd Corps of the National Guard. We heard about the innovations that has transformed the battle space through the last 2 years, how Ukraine has been in the lead, Russians are catching up. How do you, in your section, with your unit, how do you evaluate the situation and where do you see things as heading?
Всіх вітаю. Слава Україні.
Greetings to everyone. Glory to Ukraine. I'm commander of the 2nd Corps. The commander of the 3rd Corps is Andriy Biletsky. As regards innovations, I fully agree with what my brother in arms has just said. I will just add that our battlefield now depends very much on evolutions, technological and societal. We are changing very rapidly, and so rapidly, in fact, that the enemy cannot catch up with us, because we are few and we have to do this. We're getting stronger as infantry, as a military, and this is our advantage at the moment. But advantage depends not just on the situation of the battlefield. Now the war is getting increasingly dragged out, and now the big question is who will be the first to refuse to prosecute the war. Everything depends not just on our military, but also on what is going on in the rear. Everyone who is related to this war should be developed and changing. The world has changed, and everyone should be engaged in the battlefield and work for the sake of the battlefield. Once we manage to do this and dedicate everything to our survival, to the survival of our state, only then will we be successful. But victory also depends on finance, on support. That's why it's not just up to us, but the European societies that should be involved, because without your assistance, without your financial support, it'll be very tough for them. But not just for us. If Ukraine, God forbid, does not stand, the next victim will be European societies. And trust me, Russia will not depart from their goals, because their goals are about capturing and destroying other countries. So make no mistake, the war will not stop here in Ukraine if we fall. You can never make a deal with the Muscovites. History has persuaded us of that, and we would like our European partners to be faster and more efficient in supporting us, because the destiny of Ukraine will largely determine the further destiny of Europe. The battlefield is rapidly changing, we are all developing, but we are holding the line. This concludes my brief.
Thank you, and I can just add, I think that if you would have listened to, had the opportunity to listen to the conference here and the discussions, there's a deep awareness of this. We heard yesterday how the UK had announced a fairly major new package, also of sanctions. The Danes had a big package coming out yesterday. The Swedes had an even bigger package coming out a couple of days earlier. So from the European side, there's an awareness of this. Then it's a question, of course, of translating this, the money, the technology, the willpower, into your defensive capabilities on the ground. And that you are doing in a very impressive way. I don't know if you have anything more to add to what you said. I just have one question to you, perhaps, because you are looking the enemy into the eye much more clearly than most. How do you see them coping? They are struggling to innovate as fast as you do. They have, of course, more manpower they can throw into the battle. But how do you see they are coping?
Ви знаєте, на даний час дуже влучне питання. Дякую за
This is a very relevant question. They're doing their job as well. We all know the nature of the war, and it is unchanged. There is a certain myth with which our generations were growing up about invincible Russia. And Russia is kind of spreading this myth that no one can overpower them. And some of the leaders of European countries believe in that myth, just like some other people who have not met Russians on the battlefield. And this myth is spreading, metastasizing like a cancer tumor. Ukraine and the Ukrainian society have proven that Russia can be stopped. We have crashed this myth about invincibility of Russia. We have broken it together with you, with the European societies, with the United States of America. But then at some point something happened that some people wanted to make a deal with the Russians, hoping that it'll work. No, it won't. As my friend Andrii Biletsky said, they have a clear-cut strategy, and they're thinking hard on their plans, and their strategy is very high quality. As regards the tactical level, they will never be better than we are, because the nature of their upbringing is different. They are kind of slaves inside. They just go to meet their death. The nature of our military and the European military is totally different from that of the Russian Federation, because we're doing everything possible to preserve people's lives and to defend our country. So Russians are good at planning, but as regards the tactical level, they're not very good. They just throw their meat into the meat grinder, and nothing has changed since the Second World War in that respect. Yes, but strategy-wise, they are a little bit better than we are. But tactically, no matter how many drones they have, they are poor, and they can never prevail because they are slaves. This concludes my brief.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I'm now going to move offline and ask General Hnatov, who's the Chief of Staff of the Ukraine Forces of Ukraine, about what really worries you and makes you most angry at the moment, or rather in recent months.
Бажаю всім міцного здоров'я, шановні пані та панове.
Greetings, everyone. For fairness' sake, I would like to refer to what was being said by my colleagues who spoke before me. And I would like to say that our strategy is in place, strategic planning is in place, because without it, we would have long ago lost any possibility to carry on. And it would be fair to say that if a strategy is not backed up with resources, remains a piece of paper. For any strategy to be implemented, it has to be timely funded and provided with all necessary enablers. That is why Ukraine, from the very outset, addressed their partners, and we are working on it, because being one-on-one with the enemy, and especially if your enemy is such a formidable one as the Russian Federation, it would be very difficult. We saw the world creating economic unions, military alliances and so on. But the question is how they operate. Sometimes they lack resolve, and this is something that irritates me most of all. Going back to the time of the annexation of Crimea, what irritated me most of all, there was always a hope that something would happen not the way Putin planned. But Putin has a clear-cut goal, and he will strive to reach it, and not just in Ukraine, but beyond. This is absolutely essential for him if he wants to keep power. He can do this only if he prosecutes this war on, be it in Ukraine or beyond. No matter what, he will be doing this. We see what's going on, we analyze it, we are aware of this, but when it comes to decision taking, sometimes we lack determination, and we think how to go about it, even though everything is regulated and strategized, and people have prior plans, but when it comes to implementation, we very often lack resolve. Another thing that irritates, or to be more accurate, which makes us concerned, is that sometimes we tend to underestimate the enemy. We look at what is going on in the Russian Federation and we think that Putin will somehow decide to stop the war. No, it's the other way around. He's forming new military districts. He forms new systems of UAVs, of unmanned systems. He understands what can give an edge to their military. And the previous speaker said clearly that the innovations and the rapid implementation of new technologies will make the difference. And very often we disregard the factor of time, but in a modern war, this is crucial. The knowledge and experience which came in handy when I was commanding a unit which was liberating a part of the Kherson Oblast. Today, this experience is relevant for me only at the level of very basic principles of combat. All the rest has changed over the last 3 years. It has changed drastically. Every 2 to 3 months, something new comes up which requires new doctrines and a rethink of our strategy, the quest for new resources, and a rapid implementation in practice. So what really makes us outraged is that when we see that Putin is up to something, we think that maybe he will not do it, but he will. Take, for instance, the incursion into the Polish airspace by Russian drones. It wasn't a mistake or an accident. It was a purposeful act of aggression, and ignoring that would be the biggest folly that you can make.
Thank you. That's a very powerful point indeed. Over to you, Carl.
And then we continue with Mr. General Moisiuk, who is the Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine. I think it's been very powerful what we've heard so far on the very rapid evolution of technology and tactics, how the character of this particular war has changed more or less year by year. And it's now a very different sort of war than it was a couple of years ago when the war started. I guess you are busy looking ahead as well on what's next in that particular respect. And one overriding question, I guess David Petraeus will come to that also somewhat later, is that in the history of warfare, there's always been a shift between whether the offense or the defense has the advantage in terms of technology and tactics, barbed wires, tanks, and whatever. I mean, to me, it looks like in the last few years here, defense has the advantage. an offense is more difficult. Would that be your view as well, or do you see that changing?
Ну, я думаю, що кожен
Well, I think every commander at a tactical operational level will agree that arranging an offensive is a more challenging task. Too many factors to look into. A successful offensive is an extremely challenging task. A successful offensive, whether from our side, from the enemy side, we saw them primarily at the beginning of the war in 2022, some operations of scale, massive troops movement, territories being taken and freed. Since 2023, the situation did change a lot. You do know that in 2024-25, the front line, the contact line, changed only minimally because of these complications I mentioned. Clearly, these are linked to what has been mentioned previously, new technologies, making the battlefield transparent, an extremely wide tactical segment that is under total fire control, huge logistics challenges, because every troop movement, I mean a sudden one, an unexpected one, is practically not possible from either our or the enemy side. Not to say that we will forget about potential offensives or the enemy will do it. Everyone will be looking for other efficient ways to do it. Russia's infiltration-based approach, so much touted, it's actually about properly using the statutes of NATO armies. It's very clearly stated there. It's one of the ways to do it. Infiltration methods are there. We never had it in our statutes in Soviet time, after it. But these are the things that they learn every day at the battlefields. They learn from us, from our partners. And I think that in a relatively short span of time, some really efficient and rather cheap solutions will be developed that will be used en masse, and probably they will allow for the restoration of rather efficient wild-scale maneuvers, and the first one to master it will find it easier to overcome.
Right. Before we go to General Petraeus, I want to quickly go back to one quick question with Commander Biletsky, and then I'll come to you, General Petraeus. I want to quickly ask you, can you, Commander Biletsky, tell us a little bit more about the question of strategy and the questions about whether Ukraine is weak on strategy at the moment and that needs to change?
Це, мабуть, питання насправді.
I think it's the matter of rather institutional nature. Russia is an expansionist, militarist state. They have been like that for good 400 years, if going from the Golden Horde time for quite longer time indeed. And yes, they have this tradition of long-fetched, long-ranging strategies. We have never had this experience yet because, well, Ukraine is a new nation, but if we are to win the war, I think we must really think in terms of generations, not about months or years, in generational terms. Now, when it comes to innovations and their role in the strategy, not a single innovation in this war has been initiated by Russia. all sorts of innovation have always been from the Ukrainian side. But Russia is well able to do a quality analysis of our progresses, and they're also very well able to scale up their response, their production, again, within the line of their tradition, also the military tradition. Actually, any sort of planning starts with proper assessment of the enemy and its assets. And this is the strong point. Our strong point is in our innovative potential, our creativity. I'm not going to detail things that will come next, but already now Ukraine has certain first steps to announce, to usher in new evolutionary steps in this war. The key thing is, rather than telling about it to everyone, we should be able to strategically work on that and practically implement these updated strategies. Yes, we are much more creative, and if we are successful in their implementation, we will have the upper hand. We will go with our innovation, and Russia will be still trailing a year, 2 years, maybe 6 years behind. But we have to remember that they will be able to reproduce them en masse. So the whole matter of strategy is not about, seeing strategy as something for the battlefield. It's rather about strategies of developing the military-industrial potential. It's about a strategy to ensure that new technologies looked into and properly used. Not sure if I was understandable enough, but this is my view.
Thank you. That was a very important and very powerful clarification. I'd like to turn to General Petraeus and ask you to comment on what you've heard.
Well, first of all, I think it should be very, very clear that the future of war is right here in Ukraine. And the reason Ukraine is leading this, but with the Russians very quickly coming behind them, is because in the very beginning they sat down and they realized that a small Soviet army was not going to beat a large Soviet army. They already knew this. They'd already been training in this way. But they made a commitment, again, to innovativeness and to creating a culture of learning so that the organization is constantly, again, learning from what others are doing, sharing this, and then eventually institutionalizing this. That innovation has indeed, Carl, yes, at the tactical and operational level, defense now is paramount, or is the most important, if you will, feature of the battlefield, unless you can achieve surprise. But in a war that has ubiquitous surveillance at all times, it is very difficult to do that. Now, the Ukrainians did do that. They achieved surprise in the Kursk offensive, and it was truly a traditional combined arms operation, which doesn't generally succeed on the front lines here now, but because the Russians were completely surprised, tanks, artillery, infantry, electronic warfare, air defense, all the rest of that, with drones overhead to be sure, actually did enable the Ukrainians to achieve quite an impressive offensive in that case. But generally, given the sheer number of drones and other surveillance systems, that is very, very difficult to do. Let's recognize, by the way, again, that the Western systems that were quite impactful in the beginning when they were provided, the Switchblade drone, the suicide drone, anti-personnel, anti-tank, the Gimlers, the guided missile launch rocket system, very, very precise, the precision artillery that was provided, all of these wondrous systems provided by the West are now of very mixed effectiveness, if effective at all, because the Russians have indeed deployed countermeasures to them. And the Ukrainians, again, their systems not only cost 1/10 or 1/20th of the price of Western systems, they're probably 10 times more effective. What you see here now with unmanned systems of all types, so think about the strategic unmanned systems, where a couple million dollars worth of Ukrainian drones secreted into the roofs of transport trucks thousands of kilometers apart carry out Operation Spiderweb and damage or destroy $5 to $7 billion worth of Russian strategic aircraft. Think about the Nemesis Regiment. We first started going to it when it was still just a small battalion. It's a regiment now. It'll be a brigade, one of the many unmanned systems units, which has now destroyed over $1 billion of Russian weapon systems and equipment, and of course tens of thousands of Russian soldiers. Think about now the advent of drones which can get through the electronic warfare and jamming and all the rest of that because they're spooling out fiber optic cable behind them. Thousands of these in the course of a day or two. The last time I was here, I asked General Syrskyi just roughly how many unmanned systems of all types did you use, and he said nearly 7,000. By the way, that's what Ukraine is able to do by producing 3.5 million drones in a single year, and it could produce twice that if it had the money to do that as well, and that's what we should be enabling them indeed to do. Think about the situation in the Black Sea. Ukraine doesn't have what we would see as a traditional navy at all, and yet it has sunk 1/3 of the Russian Black Sea fleet and forced it to bottle itself up inside a harbor from which it cannot go out for fear of seeing the rest of them sunk. It is essentially parked and no longer in effect. And again, that was done by maritime drones. I drove one of these the other day, by the way, remotely, obviously. It went 100 kilometers an hour. I've never seen anything. I mean, think of the water skiing you could do behind this thing if you could get the water skier up. But again, all of this. And then again, as I mentioned in the earlier session, you've also got unmanned, remotely driven vehicles, robotic machine guns and other weapon systems, and also remotely controlled ground systems. All of that because, of course, this front line, and the front line is not just the front line, it's probably 20 kilometers deep on either side, is the most lethal no man's land in the history of warfare.
Right.
And all of this is enabled by a command control communications and intelligence system with a common operational picture developed by that great entrepreneur right there who came over here right after the war started and decided he wanted to help. And now with hugely talented Ukrainian engineers has built this with a few $1 million and is far better than the billions of dollars it was spent on JAD-C3I. This compresses the sensor to shooter, the kill chain, to an unprecedentedly small amount. By the way, I want to underscore what we heard earlier there as well, Gillian, and that is that the destiny.
I can see Victor's getting
the destiny of Ukraine, and I thank Victor as always. And I was at Yalta with him the last time it was actually in Yalta. The destiny of Ukraine is the destiny of Europe, and if we recognize that, we need to take 3 actions: change the battlefield realities, dramatically increase the economic pressure, and then provide Ukraine with credible guarantees, binding commitments, snapback sanction promises, and a variety of other actions, because only then will the realities change Putin's calculus from believing that he can still win to recognizing that the balance is no longer in his favor. And then, and only then, is when a ceasefire or an agreement becomes possible and durable.
As you say, it's about the sharpen, starve, and secure approach, the 3 S's. Over to you, Carl.
Well, thank you. I think we have covered primarily, of course, the ground aspect of the war. Before concluding, we have 40 seconds left. Just add that the element that has been increasing in importance is, of course, the long-range strikes as well. I just saw the news the last few days. We've said Ukrainian or strikes that has not been said who did them against the Primorsk oil terminal of the Russians in the innermost part of the Gulf of Finland. And the Usluga terminal that is opposite it in the Gulf of Finland has been severely affected by attacks as well. This is another element of the very rapid change of the face of this particular conflict that we've seen
And
in the last
20% of the refinery capacity of Russia has been damaged or destroyed, and there are gas lines, needless to say, that are stretching quite considerably.